All right, let's leave that alone. Let's talk a little bit about the unauthorized biography of George Bush. This week is the 20th anniversary. So we're talking about George Bush, the unauthorized biography. And it has been in print since 1992. It has been available on the Internet since October 1996. And you know that old saying, right? Habent sua fata libelli, books have their destinies. This one, I think, has had a significant impact. Maybe we start from the beginning, or more or less. This book, right, heavily researched, about 650 pages, contains a lot of material that was relevant in particular to the 1992 election campaign, and it was written with one eye on the need to get Mad Dog Bush the Elder out of office. And to that extent, it did contribute, as I'll try to point out. When the Republican National Committee heard that this book was being prepared, the book was largely written between about the time of the August coup in Moscow, August 1991. Between then and December 1991 into January 1992. So during the time that the Soviet Union was finally collapsing, this book was being prepared. I have to stress, one of the people who made the book possible was a very distinguished Russian Soviet Orientalist, and this was Grigory Lyevovich Bondarevsky. And Bondarevsky had been, I guess you could say, an advisor to Stalin. He had been an advisor in particular to the Soviet Socialist Republic of Uzbekistan, and he had written the definitive book on the Baghdad railway, the Berlin to Baghdad railway, Baghdadskaya Zhelezhnaya Doroga, I think. So he's a distinguished historian. He had worked as a consultant for international oil companies by virtue of his experience in Central Asia, and he died or was murdered under very, very suspicious circumstances in Moscow in somewhat later in the 90s. Certainly within 10 years of the book coming out, he was no longer with us. So Bondarevsky, hats off to Bondarevsky. How is he relevant? Inside the so-called LaRouche organization at that time, and that's where this project matured. It was virtually impossible to get time enough and resources enough to write a serious book. But with the endorsement of Bondarevsky, it became possible, because I said to him, "Look, let me just tell you some things about George Bush," and they listened to it all, took it all in, and then he said, in effect, "Why you don't tell world story of bastard Bush?" And with that, the bureaucratic logjam, right, the insufferable, stifling, anti-intellectual atmosphere was somehow broken, at least for this project. So part of the project then was to research the 1964 Senate election, and this is worth coming back to because of the importance of Texas and things going on down there. And I've told this story a couple of times in the last few weeks, but worth telling it again. Senator Ralph Webster Yarborough of Texas was really the leading Southern Democrat in the post-New Deal situation of the 60s, even into the 70s. But in the 50s to the 60s, it was Ralph Webster Yarborough, as I was always proud to note. He had a very, very interesting personal story, probably not worth going into, but he gave me access to his papers at the University of Texas in Austin. And I got to go through the story of how he defeated George H.W. Bush for the Senate in the year 1964. What was his approach? And that's a whole chapter of this Bush bio. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're talking about George Bush, the unauthorized biography. 20 years ago this week, press conference at the National Press Club, was about 40 to 50 representatives of the world press, and I stress the world press. The biggest single group was from the Far East, Japan, South Korea, places like this. They were highly interested. Latin Americans were interested. Arab world, Eastern, Southern Europe, highly interested. Northern Europe, Western Europe, not so much. British might have been there. I think Ambrose Evans Pritchard, at that time the correspondent here of the London Daily Telegraph, he may have stopped by. But the U.S., of course, AWOL, U.S. press, clearly corrupt at that point, and so forth. So a lot of work in the chapter on the story about how Senator Yarborough defeated Bush in 1964. And the story with that was that Senator Yarborough then came to regard that chapter, even though it was in the middle of this book about George Bush, that this was the best summary that anyone had ever written of Senator Yarborough's career. And he ordered a case of these books when they came out in the middle of 1992. And then, during that campaign, that fall, it was, of course, Clinton-Gore against Bush-Quayle. Whenever Clinton and or Gore came to Texas in order to maximize their popular appeal, they always demanded that Senator Yarborough would come along with them and campaign. And in every case, he told me, he would always bring copies of George H.W. Bush, or George Bush, the unauthorized biography, July 1992, and put them into the hands of Clinton and Gore, saying, look, this tells you what you have to do. You've got to get out there for the people, fight for the people, and not for various moneyed interests. Now, obviously, that didn't work out too well, but Senator Ralph Yarborough was a great guy. I also we have some material in the book about Wright Patman, another great Texas populist. The part about Watergate shows that the Watergate that won the day, so to speak, was the CIA version of Watergate. It was the Woodward, Bernstein, McCord, Gordon Liddy, and so forth, right? The spook community. But there was another Watergate. There were real crimes committed by Nixon, obviously, and the person who was interested in going after those was Congressman Wright Patman of Texas. And in honor of that fact, right, the Wright Patman is one of the first people who said, follow the money. I gave, as soon as this book came out, and even a couple of days before the press conference, I remember walking over to the House of Representatives and going to the office of Representative Henry Gonzalez of Texas, who had inherited the mantle of Wright Patman. And Henry Gonzalez later sent me a very nice card, right, thanking me for the book. So all of these different elements. There's stuff in here. I got material from the late Sarah McClendon, because one of the people that figures in the book is her brother, I think, Gordon McClendon. Anyway, there's a whole story of Texas politics, which is included in it. Some very, very interesting revelations then. In chronological order through the book, we'll start it and see how far we get. Very, very dramatic, of course, is the fact that Prescott Bush, the father of the then candidate, the grandfather now of the more recent disastrous, catastrophic president, George Bush the Younger, that Prescott Bush was, of course, the managing partner of Brown Brothers Harriman. This was the most powerful, largest investment bank, largest in terms of money and most powerful in terms of politics. Between the two world wars, it was Brown Brothers Harriman, and that included brothers of Harriman, Averell Harriman, Roland alias Bunny Harriman, but then also Robert Lovett, who went on to choose the Kennedy cabinet and essentially set the Kennedy presidency on the road to various severe problems to which it eventually succumbed. But the managing partner, the guy who sat in the back office, was Prescott Bush. And it turned out that in the 1920s, he had linked up with Fritz Thyssen to create the Union Banking Corporation in Lower Manhattan, and that entity then, under the control of Thyssen, was used to funnel money from Thyssen's investments in North America over to the Dutch bank, Bank voor Handel en Scheepvaart, and that was then used to buy weapons and to otherwise support the seizure of power by Hitler. And that Prescott Bush, not only that, but by virtue of his institutional position, he was in effect a part of the management structure of certain German cartels which controlled Auschwitz and other death camps, parts of the SS state, the SS war economy, where people were literally worked to death in order to extract the value contained in their bodies. So, also then the story of how in October 1942, Leo J. Crowley, a well-known figure at the time, the alien property custodian, had seized the shares of stock owned by Prescott Bush in the Union Banking Corporation on the grounds that this Union Banking Corporation was an enemy entity, an enemy alien controlled by Nazis from Germany and Hungary. And that's this Thyssen family, right? I think the Thyssen-Bornemisza Foundation somehow reflects the German-Hungarian connection. But anyway, in those days, it was seized. And then there's another story about how the Bush family actually got this money back. Now, that part in particular became then common knowledge. And by the time, for example, about 10 years later, right, from 1992 to 2003, when I went to the San Francisco 9/11 conference organized by Carol Brûlé, they had part of their handouts and logos was, behind every terrorist, there is a Bush. So you have Hitler, and then Prescott Bush, and then Osama bin Laden, and Bush the Younger. But the idea was that by 10 years after the time this book came out, practically everybody in the world knew that Bush's father had these intimate relations with the Nazis, with Thyssen in particular, and that he was complicit in financing and indeed arming the Nazi Party to take over in Germany. And this idea, of course, then has been borrowed, purloined, stolen, plagiarized. You can use all sorts of terms. You can think of any number, right? Sometimes people who are themselves mythomaniacs, who are trying to get attention, come forward and seek to identify themselves with this discovery. There was a guy who actually, he started off in New Hampshire, right, in one of the New Hampshire weeklies. He started with this, and he eventually convinced himself that the discovery had been his all along. I'm sorry. It comes out of this book. Kevin Phillips, American Dynasty, right, about the Bush family. His method is interesting. Instead of just taking this stuff silently, he says, this book has massive, often revelatory research, but the authors are lost in snowbanks of paranoia. That's Kevin Phillips. Well, you're welcome, Kevin. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. A few more minutes now on the story of George Bush, the unauthorized biography. And the story, of course, is that this is the fountainhead from which all other accounts of Prescott Bush supporting Thyssen, who in turn supported Hitler, all of this comes from George Bush, the unauthorized biography. It's the first one that has the vesting order from Leo Crowley, the alien property custodian, the story of Union Banking Corporation, the headlines in the New York Herald Tribune and other papers, and so forth. It's also interesting, if you look at somebody like George Seldes. George Seldes was active in those years, right? In 1942, he would have been in the midst of his, the prime of his activity. You'd think that he would have something to say about Prescott Bush and Brown Brothers Harriman, but for some reason he doesn't, because he's got all kinds of other people who were around at the time, and he's very quick to point out connections that people have to Nazism, fascism, and so forth. But anyway, you've got various mythomaniacs. You've got Kevin Phillips taking this stuff and then insulting me as paranoid. Then you've got Russ Baker, right? The family of secrets, the Bush dynasty. How about that? I have to confess, I haven't seen this. I don't know how he handles it. I do see that I am not in the index. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the footnotes. I'll have to take a look. But still, if he's got the stuff about Thyssen, which I think he's going to have, well, then maybe he doesn't have the stuff about Thyssen. But if he does have it, then that comes from George Bush, the unauthorized biography. So when the Republican National Committee found out that this book was being prepared, they first of all said, don't publish it until after the November election. And there were some people in this entity that I was working with at the time who thought, yeah, that would be a good idea. Let's not make any more enemies. But I didn't want to do that. I thought it was important to publish it so the voters could know. And one of the things was, of course, that the U.S. news organizations had completely failed to tell you the truth about Bush the Elder. This was called the Red Studebaker School of Journalism, right? That whenever you found an account that said George H.W. Bush went to Midland, Texas, in the 1940s in an old beat-up red Studebaker, you knew that you were dealing with the family printout. And I actually met a guy now, I think he's still around, or maybe not, Doug Caddy of Houston, Galveston, Texas, had been offered the job of taking a pile of family press releases and other approved material and concocting yet another campaign bio for Bush out of that, which he then did not do. So the Republican National Committee wanted the book suppressed or delayed, and then when it came out, the opinion from the Republican National Committee was that it contained sufficient scandal material to defeat Bush in a close election. And it may be, obviously there's no way to say this for sure, that that's what it did in the following sense. The part about the book that would have been most relevant is the Iran-Contra chapter, where, of course, it's clear that George H.W. Bush was the covert operations czar of the Reagan administration, right? Reagan, the well-known sleepwalker, the somnambulist, sleepwalking through his presidency, right, signing papers, not knowing what he was doing, the wife controlled by an astrologer, all that. But that really operating behind the scenes, directing the covert operation, was George Bush of the CIA. It looks like this family of secrets by Russ Baker seems to think it's a discovery that the Bush family are connected to the spook world, to the OSS and the CIA. Well, no, that's no discovery at all, right? The Bush biography tells you, for example, that there's a pretty good case that Bush the Elder was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? The Barbara Bush being one of the chartered freighters that was being used by the CIA to try to land the the battalion of anti-Castro Cubans on the island. So Iran-Contra, the relevance of Iran-Contra is that it was right before the election, the ruling elite or factions of it signaled that they were fed up with George H.W. Bush by having various people, including Caspar Weinberger and others, high-level people, Claire George and any number of others, indicted in Iran. And it was clear that George H.W. Bush's name was going to go on the witness list, and that is what he responded to by pardoning the main people involved after he lost the election, and that is in December of 1992. But now, quickly, since time is short, what else do we find out here of interest? The Permian Basin Gang is the basis of a family alliance between the Bushes and Henry Kravis, right? Henry Kravis of Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts, still around, still going to the Bilderberger Group. Carolyn Rome, no longer in the picture. Rubbers goes to Congress. That was Bush's nickname. I think Wilbur Mills called him Rubbers because he was always talking about family planning, contraception, birth control, and he is the guy who brought Herrnstein and Shockley to the Congress to begin spewing their eugenics, which was in a very bad odor because it had been so much associated with the Nazis. In Watergate, of course, Bush, the chairman of the Republican Party, a major Watergate figure, he is close to this guy Lou Russell, who is one of the central figures of this, completely neglected by Woodward and Bernstein in terms of understanding what happened. Lou Russell died under mysterious circumstances just at the point when an operation to sort of counterattack the prevailing version of the scandal was being prepared, and George H.W. Bush had become aware of what was going on and may have taken steps to stop it from happening. All of that included in that chapter. So there's also this famous quote, I can't say it on the air here, I don't think I can anyway, about Bush's reaction, the smoking gun tape. The smoking gun tape is not the part that was erased. If that were true, it wouldn't be the smoking gun tape. The smoking gun tape is a part of the Nixon-Watergate tapes where Nixon essentially talks about how he's going to commit perjury, exactly how he's going to do it in detail. And he says, the Texans have got to be told to testify this, that, and the other thing. Well, who are the Texans? The Texans are none other than George Bush the Elder and Chairman Mao Liedtke, his business partner, people who had worked on Zapata Petroleum, Pennzoil, and they're later involved in this attempted takeover of by Texaco taking over Getty Oil. And in this case, the interesting story is that the judge that finally ruled against Texaco and in favor of essentially the Bush interests, the Getty Oil and others, right? Chairman Mao Liedtke. The judge who handed down this verdict is Tough Tony Farris, and Tough Tony Farris was a political appointee of George Bush years and years before, so he should have recused himself, and these high-powered lawyers didn't know it. Anyway, there's a wealth of material, 650 pages, and a wonderful time to go out and buy a copy and read it. Summer reading, if you're headed to the beach, George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. Online since 1996, there is one chapter online that you won't find in the book, the CIA cover-up of a Kennedy assassination.